Hi, welcome. My name is Bridget Shim, and I'm a professor at the Daniels faculty at the University of Toronto, and I will be your host for this event. We are so pleased that you are joining us for Architecture in Dialogue, the 14th cycle of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture event. This is a collaboration between the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Toronto, Canada, and the Aga Khan Award for Architecture in Geneva, Switzerland. In late March 2020, we were preparing for a live event. The first part was in the auditorium of the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, followed by an exhibition opening at the Daniels faculty at One Spadina in our gallery, followed by a gallery talk focused on the 2019 winning projects of this award cycle. The exhibition was designed, the plane tickets were booked, and then we were hit by a global pandemic. So this exhibition has been remounted as a website, and this event is taking place online instead of in person right now. One of the positive aspects of this is the remounting of this event during a pandemic is that we are joined by several architecture schools on the African continent. We would like to extend a very warm welcome to the students and faculty of the following schools: the National School of Architecture in Fez, Morocco, the Foura Bay College Faculty of Engineering and Architecture at the University of Sierra Leone in Freetown, Sierra Leone, the Ethiopian Institute of Architecture, Building Construction and City Development at the University of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, the School of Architecture, Planning and Geomathematics at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, the School of Architecture and the Built Environment at the College of Science and Technology in Kigali, Rwanda, and the Department of Architecture at the University of Lagos in Lagos, Nigeria. Many thanks go to my colleague and symposium participant, Aziza Shawani, for connecting us to these schools of architecture across the African continent. And we are so pleased to welcome you, and we really hope that you will ask questions in our chat at the end of this event. So next is our order of events. I wanted to share the outline with you. First, we'll start with land acknowledgements. We will also have our web designer, in effect, introduce you to this website that we have, which is our sort of online exhibition. We will then hear from some of our amazing Daniels students, both undergrad and graduate. And some of them will tell you what they think about the Aga Khan Architecture Award. Then we will have a 6-minute video prepared by the Aga Khan Award for Architecture Secretariat, which will give you a kind of overview of the 14th cycle and a sense of the process. Then we will hear from each of our symposium speakers, and they will in effect share what I think are the lessons they have learned for this cycle and give us a sense as to, in effect, how their shared experience gives us a view about the future of design. These presentations will be followed by a discussion amongst the panelists, which will be moderated by me. And then we will have wrap-up questions, both from students at our Daniels faculty within North America, and then part of this global audience. So we really encourage questions to be really part of a kind of broader dialogue. And then we'll wrap up with thank yous. If we want to start, I would like to welcome, in effect, Professor Mason White from our faculty to give our land acknowledgements. Mason?
Thank you, Bridget. It's a real honor to be here with these esteemed guests, and thanks so much for assembling this event in light of all the challenges ahead. I'd like to first respectfully acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto is located. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant and wampum between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Three Fires Confederacy, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources in and around the Great Lakes. Today, the digital space and conceptual place that we are meeting in, as well as the meeting place of Toronto, or Toronto it is known, are still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. While we recognize that not everyone is sharing the same space during this time, we encourage each of you to take the time to think about, learn, and reflect upon where you are and the Indigenous peoples who have lived there, are currently there, and the future generations who will live there. As people living on this land, it's essential for us to reflect the ethos and respect that the Indigenous communities show towards the land and towards each other. We must show support through our actions, not just our words, for those of us who are occupying this land. And now back to my esteemed colleague, Bridget, your host for today's highly anticipated talk.
Thank you so much, Mason. Next, I thought it was important to explain to you why this event is happening and why it is so pressing. Since 1980, the mission of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture has been to promote global design excellence in the field of architecture and the built environment. The projects are united in their drive to improve environmental, cultural, and societal sustainability and quality of life through architecture and design. Although this award has existed for decades, the winning projects are not well known to North Americans and particularly to students of architecture, landscape, and urbanism, who could really learn from their examples. Taken individually and seen together, these works provide remarkable precedents for tackling global challenges. So we have organized this online symposium right now and a new website to highlight the work of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture program, both to our Daniels community and to the world at large. It is our hope that these initiatives will be a source of discovery and inspiration, leading to projects that improve communities around the world and enable a better future for our planet. So next I want to introduce Andrew Bacco, who is the web designer, trained as an architect, teaching in our undergrad program, and he's created a new website called Architecture in Dialogue. So I will turn it over to Andrew to give you a preview of this newly launched website.
Thank you, Bridget. Hi, everybody. Before I get started, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the entire team involved with this website for all of your support and input. A huge shout out to Daniel's master's student, Nico McGlashan, for the incredible support and hard work. The team at Shim Sutcliffe Architects, of course, Bridget and Jeannie Lim, and the support of the amazing Daniel's Exhibitions Committee members, Maurizio Pacheco and Mini Brody. And so, as Bridget has already mentioned, this website serves as both being a virtual exhibition of the 14th cycle of the awards, but also as a valuable resource that will really allow users to learn more about the history and the primary themes of the award program. And so, in addition to highlighting the 6 award-winning projects for the 14th cycle of the awards, the site also contains hundreds of virtual resources that have been collated over the past 40 years of the award program into one centralized locations. And also within the website, we have excerpts from the Architecture and Dialogue publication that was published in tandem with the 14th cycle of the awards by Architangle. And also within the website, we have plenty of interactive content, videos. And the website also highlights the Wadi Hanifa Wetlands Project in Saudi Arabia, which is a Canadian-led project by Moriyama and Tashima Planning, and was a winning project for the 10th cycle of the awards. And so we're really excited about the virtual exhibition and hope that it really allows students and practitioners worldwide to learn more about the award program, its values, and also a broader contribution to the architectural discipline in a global context. So Bridget, thank you. We'll hand things back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. So now it's really important for me that we start this event off by hearing from our own Daniel students in our undergraduate and graduate programs, and to find out what some of them think about this award. Our students are among the best and the brightest, and they are our future. So let's roll to the video. Thank you.
Does the Aga Khan Architecture Award matters to students? Yes, absolutely. I do believe that it matters because it is, it brings so much more than architecture as an artifact, and it brings society and the community into design. It pays so much attention to the importance of the culture and communities in the process of design that we need to pay attention to as students, as architects, and it's our responsibility to bring that in.
I think especially with today's world and globalization, I think we're all interconnected, and it's so important for us to know what's going on in the rest of the world. And I think especially being in Toronto, such a cosmopolitan city, all the students are coming from all corners of the world, and it almost doesn't make sense to do it otherwise. It doesn't make sense to not learn about what's happening in, again, like Burkina Faso or Bangladesh or Cairo.
I think it goes back to the question of what is good architecture. And North American students have to learn from places that are exploring new, different things. We can't just be consumed with a particular way of thinking. It's very narrow. And when you look at some spaces, like for instance, this project in Senegal, it's looking at the importance of local economy. It's looking at what are techniques that are used at the local level, how are those then enriching the architectural project, and also the relationship that people have to that. And students in North America have to understand that these processes are very, very powerful, because the individual that is going to inhabit that space has such a role to play. And I don't know how much architectural students in North America are even thinking about other ways of thinking. And if we continue on this way, well, quite frankly, it's not enough.
I think the Aga Khan Award allows us to engage with projects that are across the world. And this doesn't mean that they're not relevant to us. It means that we get to be exposed to alternative modes of practice, alternative models of architecture, and ones that particularly engage with the culture of the space and the interests and values of the people who are using the place.
I think the Aga Khan Award means that there is more than Eurocentric architecture, that as a Middle Eastern Muslim woman myself, I can do projects in my own communities, and that they could be recognized and that they could be perceived as important works of architecture.
The important thing about these projects is that they can show you how the built form and the values of a place can go hand in hand. And this is an extremely successful approach in understanding how that works and being exposed to these models of practice and models of building.
The process is really important because when we pay attention to it, it's when we pay attention to the people who are using the architecture, or what type of material are we using, how are we engaging the community and the local businesses even into our architecture, or what type of, in terms of sustainability, different things that we can bring to our design to make it richer and designed to make a difference in its own context.
The process that occurs from the initial idea of the building or the program or whatever it is, outcome, and even like the maintenance of the outcome, those things in some ways are more important than just the building itself. And it's more important because every single individual has a role to play in this world. And architecture is just a tool to allow the talents and the importance of and values of each individual to come to fruition. And so the way that this award places an importance on that whole entire process is very revolutionary.
Great. So what I wanted to do is to thank our Daniel students, Randa Omar, Bahia Marks, Zara Premji and Yasmina Prato for your voices. So next, I wanted to make sure that as part of this event, we applauded the 6 projects that have received an Aga Khan Award for Architecture in what we call the 14th cycle in 2019. And so here's the list on the screen of the 6 projects. The Alouine Diop University Teaching and Research Unit in Bombay, Senegal, the Arcadia Education Project in Bangladesh, the revitalization of Muharraq in Bahrain, the Palestinian Museum in Palestine, the Public Space Development Program in the Republic of Tatarstan within the Russian Federation, and the Wasiat Wetland Center in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. These are really 6 remarkable projects, and now they're very accessible to all of you on our website through videos, photographs, and drawings, which are remarkably put together through the Aga Khan Architecture Award program. Next, we will hear a 6-minute video that was prepared by the award program, really providing you with a great overview of the jury process and the winners for this cycle. So if we could roll this video, that would be great.
The Aga Khan Award has an incredible reputation of solidity, of legitimacy, and of importance, of meaningfulness in a world that is constantly changing and that is so challenged by political, environmental, social, cultural issues.
It's the only award that is rooted in social values, and not only in an architectural image or structure or particular architectural artifact.
It concentrates on the tangible part of architecture, but what makes it unique is that it goes beyond that into broader issues of identity, diversity, pluralism, cultural issues, and values and quality of life.
We interview the architects, we interview all the stakeholders, the users, the managers, the surrounding neighbors, and we try to find out as much possible about the quality of the building. But when we speak about the quality of the building, it's not only the physical side, it's also the social impact of the building on its immediate neighbor, but also in the city or in the country.
They're the ones who actually come back with data that is very important for the selection, and that makes it unique to any other award in the world. So the jury in itself expands through that. So we're like 9 people, but all of a sudden we become double that.
I think the final selection again captures with the great imagination what's going on in the world of built environment, which the award tends to do consistently. And one more time, it seems to have grabbed a really good bundle of 6 projects that are, I think, a fantastic measure of how design and construction and quality affect people.
There were 20 projects shortlisted for this cycle of the award. All 20 were very powerful projects. it was difficult to tell which ones would win and which ones would not, because they all had something very serious and very rich to offer. And the final 6 were truly remarkable projects. They addressed improving the quality of urban life. They addressed dealing with the past. They addressed dealing with marginalized societies. And in many ways, they address what the architectural award, or this architectural award, is about, which is really improving the quality of life for people through high quality interventions in the built environment.
We wanted to think architecture as an intervention in an increasingly complex and challenging world. And the projects, I think, that were selected all embody that. They think of people's place in the world. They think of the commons, the shared spaces, and how they can be multiplied over time.
They also project a couple of themes that are of extreme importance in today's world, in today's environmental crisis, in today's inequality crisis, in today's crisis of displacement, and in the issue of culture and how culture has to play a role in society.
The jury got a sense that what they were doing as part of the making of choices was that they had total freedom to exercise their opinion, to debate different points of view, and then to make a choice based on consensus. And I think this time the process worked really well, and I think everybody was very happy with it.
That was great. So I just wanted to thank the Aga Khan Award for Architecture Secretariat in Geneva for sharing this video with us. Now I'd like to give a brief introduction to our symposium speakers. We have a powerhouse lineup, and I'm so pleased that all of you could join us. First up will be Noura Al-Sayah, who is an architect working for the Bahrain Authority for Culture and Antiquities. And Noura was instrumental in the realization of this revitalization project in Bahrain, which tells the story of pearling in this region through a series of interventions into its urban fabric. She is a winner of the 2019 Aga Khan Award, and she will share this project with us. After that will be my colleague and professor at the Daniels faculty, Aziza Shawani. Aziza teaches here in Toronto, but she's also engaged in practice in Morocco. And she was a field reviewer for the 14th cycle, visiting built work in Senegal and Turkey. Third up is Nandita Korea Metro, and she is a principal of RMA Architects in Mumbai and Boston. She's also the director of the Charles Correa Foundation, and it was a partner of Charles Correa Associates. Nandita has spent a lot of time in Toronto over the last 15, 20 years, overseeing the realization of the Ismaili Center in Don Mills. Nandita was a member of the 2019 master jury. Fourth up will be Farooq Darakhshani, who is the director of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture program, which he has been associated with since 1982. His main area of specialization is the contemporary architecture of Muslim societies, and we're so pleased that he's here. And then finally is Andreas Lepik, director of the Architecture Museum in Munich, a professor at the Technical University of Munich, and he was the editor of Architecture in Dialogue, which is our publication, and he will also share, in effect, the process of realizing this book. So we hope that these speakers will provide to all of you insights into each of their perspectives related to this prestigious award program, sharing, in effect, the lessons they learned from their part of the 14th cycle. And I hope that revealing of their understanding will be really enriching for all of you. So let's start with Noura, and she's going to share her screen with us.
Hi, thanks a lot. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's truly an honor to be here with all of you today. As Bridget mentioned, I'm going to briefly present to you the Pearling Path, which was part of the Muharraq Revitalization Project, which we were very fortunate and very thankful to be one of the recipients of the Aga Khan Award in this 14th cycle in 2019. Which has truly really meant a lot to the project, especially that the project is still a project that's in realization because it's a large urban scale project. The story of the Pearling Path obviously starts with the story of Bahrain and pearls. Bahrain is a small island in the Arabian Gulf that has been linked to the economy and the trade of pearls since 3,000 years before Christ. So it has a very long relation to pearls. And this was something that was obviously really important to bring back to the forefront after the demise of the pearling economy in the 1930s. This is an aerial view of Muharraq from the 1980s. Muharraq in Bahrain is one of the islands that makes the archipelago of Bahrain, and it was the capital of the pearling economy in the Arabian Gulf. It's always a bit heartbreaking to show this image because it's an aerial image from the 1980s where much of the architectural and urban heritage of Muharraq was still intact. And obviously, as happened in many countries and many coastal cities around the world, as urban development was very paced and strongly developed in this part of the world, the island of Muharraq and mostly its architectural heritage was greatly affected and destroyed to a large extent. But luckily, the urban fabric of the city, in terms of its street networks, its streetscape, and so on, were largely preserved. And this was really the basis for the inscription of the Pearling site to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2012. So the Pearling site, as you see it, is a serial nomination. It's a complex project because it includes many different components. It has 17 historical properties that are registered, 17 public squares, a pedestrian pathway that reconnects the historic fort of Muharraq to the city of Muharraq, and therefore reestablishes the natural connection of the city to the coastline. One of the biggest challenges of the project, obviously, was not so much in the restoration of the architectural properties, but it was really in making sure that once the project was completed, the urban framework and the urban fabric of Muharraq will be preserved and intact, which was not really a given because the urban and legal framework in terms of zoning, of protection of buildings and so on was not at all in place. So actually, for probably the first 5 to 6 years of the project, and this was one of the difficulties obviously we had with the local community, because not so much happened in terms of construction, but a lot of work was done in establishing, like I said, the necessary legal framework to protect the project, and of which what we see here, which we call the facade upgrade, we first of all painstakingly surveyed all of the properties of the historic city and surveyed the 400 facades running along the 3.5 kilometer length of the pathway. We did this in collaboration with students from the University of Bahrain that surveyed each and every one of these facades, you know, with every minute detail, the wires, the exposed AC, and so on. And, you know, this was the basis of a large component of the project, which is a facade upgrade, which is basically just doing, you know, the maintenance that had been lacking for the last 30 years by removing protruding AC units, restoring historic facades, and so on. And for us, this was a really important part of the project, that the project is not only about the monuments, it's not only about the exceptional architecture, but its purpose is really to serve as a catalyst for the wider urban regeneration of the city. One of the other important components of the project, because it's an urban project and a pathway that goes through the historic city, was the wayfinding system. And how do you give the identity to something that differentiates itself from the city, but at the same time still wants to be a part of the city. So this is one of the proposal that was done by the Belgian architecture firm Office in collaboration with Bureau Basmets, where they proposed to introduce 17 public squares in voids along the Purling Path. So they were voids that were originally historic homes that unfortunately had been demolished. And we took this opportunity to introduce programs into the city that had historically not been present there, but that the city today as a contemporary city could benefit from, notably green spaces. And here, this is one of the examples of a before and after of one of these public spaces. Obviously, as in many Arab cities, whenever there is a void, it automatically gets taken over by cars, unfortunately. And so these were really leftover spaces that didn't really have any qualities as such in the city, and that were really transformed from, let's say, non-places into spaces that had an architectural quality, and spaces that were really meant as points of interaction between the local community and the visitors of the pathway. And these 17 public squares are linked by an urban lighting system that also serves as the wayfinding system through the city. In addition to that, obviously, there are these 17 historic properties. This is the house of the Fakhro family, which were traders in boat building materials. The houses of the path were not selected because they were the most architecturally outstanding buildings in the city, but because of their connection to the history of Purling. So it's really a narrative-based rehabilitation project that seeks to reintroduce the memory of Purling that had been so central to the city. One of the other, and probably the most outstanding example of the traditional architecture in Muharraq is the house of the Siadi family, their majlis that we see here more precisely. This was the family, the majlis of one of the most prominent pearl merchants, where we see through the architecture that they start to show exterior signs of wealth, showing the prominence that they had in society. This is an image from the inside of the majlis where you can see the ornamentation. And this is one of the proposal for the rehabilitation and conservation of the project, with the addition of a small pavilion to the right of the screen that you see here that will host the Pearl Museum. And that in its architecture uses the traditional lime plaster finishes that were used in the coral stone buildings, but shows only the first two layers of it to somehow show the inside of the construction that's done, but obviously in a very contemporary way. One of the other important public components of the project is a visitor center that's in a very important site at the boundary between the old and the new Muharraq, which you see here to the top of the screen. And this project by the Swiss architect Valerio Olgiati is really, it gives a monumental scale to the project. As this project is meant to be understood at the scale of the city, it provides a 7,000 square meter roofscape that connects the old parts of the city to the heart of the Sou and the heart of Muharraq, while protecting the ruins of a historical amara or warehouse that are found underneath the project. In addition to the properties and the main Purling pathway, the Aga Khan Award was really instrumental in really understanding the complexity and the breadth of the interventions in the city of Muharraq. In addition to the Purling pathway, there's a lot of cultural projects and initiatives, both by the governmental side, BACA, and NGOs, such as the Sheikh Ibrahim Center for Culture and Architecture, that was also awarded the prize. This is one of the projects that we introduced in Muharraq. it was the Bahrain Pavilion at the Expo in Milan. We had actually commissioned it as a temporary project that was supposed to be dismantled and reused at the end of the Expo. But as you see, the winning competition project was not temporary at all. It's made out of prefabricated concrete panels. But we decided then, once we awarded this project, to see if we could dismantle the building, ship it to Bahrain and rebuild it to become a permanent building, which is fortunately for us what we were able to do. And it was implemented here, you see, in the heart of Muharraq on a plot that we owned, and that by serendipity fit more or less perfectly the size of the pavilion. And it's been reinstalled in Muharraq, serving as a local botanical garden that is obviously open to everyone, and that shares an important part of the agrarian heritage of Bahrain that's unfortunately also disappearing greatly today. And so these are some views of the project as it sits today in Muharraq. And the last project that I wanted to show is a project that I actually designed not for Baka, the government entity where I work, but for the NGO, the Sheikh Ibrahim Center in Muharraq, which is a small house for architectural heritage whose aim was to exhibit architecture. And it was situated on a very, very narrow site in the midst of the historic city of Muharraq. And when we visited the site, it had these very beautiful walls that were the walls of the two adjacent buildings. And these two walls, the progression of materials used in these walls, going from traditional coral stone to block work and so on, really in themselves held the history of architecture in Muharraq. So the idea was to build a bridge structure that would span the width, the length of the plot, that was reset from the existing walls, and that would really serve as an exhibition where the walls of the city become the main exhibition itself, a bit like you were doing an X-ray through the walls of the city and the urban plots of the city. The project itself also aims to encourage a lot more interaction with the local community. So when there are public openings, the building itself completely opens and becomes a public passageway into the city. So these are just very, very briefly a glimpse into the different components of the project. And once again, it was for us, of course, obviously a really big honor to have won the award, but also a really big encouragement, because when you work on such large urban rehabilitation projects, it can get a bit, it can get a bit discouraging when you're in the midst of it, and the years pass by and you haven't reached the end of it. So it was a really great recognition, and really, it needs to be said, really a great vision of the Aga Khan, that on such large urban scale projects, they understand the importance of awarding the award, to encourage the future development of such projects. So thank you very much. And I think, Aziza, you're next.
Okay. Thank you so much, Noura, and we'll turn it over to Aziza.
Hello. I think, can you hear me and can you see my screen?
It's good.
All right, so thank you so much, Bridget, for this great event. And I'm very excited to share with you my experience reviewing the Alioune Diop University Teaching and Research Unit, which is locally referred to very simply as the lecture building. It has, quite a long name. So what was my role as a field reviewer? The best way that I can describe it when I was preparing for this lecture was really a hybrid between Lara Croft, I picked the later version, and Hercule Poirot. because in a way you have to be on the ground. You need to be looking for information that sometimes is very far away. You need to be finding translators, and sometimes, you know, there's some information or some data that's hidden from you, and you have to look for your, have very good investigative skills. So we serve in a way as a link between the master jury and the project on the ground. And my role was really to assess in situ the various facets of the project. And but I would say that the most important part was to assess the impact on users and locals, but also on the immediate environment. And those were some of the tasks that I had to do. I mean, today I'm not going to have the time to talk about all of them. I just picked some key ones. There was the description of the project, so very straightforward analysis of the context of the program, of the architecture and the landscape, the technical assessment as well, where I looked very closely at the materials used, at the climatic performance, at the environmental impact, at the functionality, at the structural system. And finally, what I found was key was the interviews that I led with the users of the building, the students and the faculty that used it daily, and that could actually tell me if it was functional, if it was comfortable, etc. And finally, I interviewed the staff that worked on the project, the architect, the engineers, the construction workers. And in a sense, that gave me a very full view of the whole process that led up to the building, but also at an analysis of its post-occupancy. And I was actually very surprised to discover things that were not on paper, but also things that were on paper that sometimes were a bit embellished. And, you know, like before I start sharing with you, you know, some of my experience, I wanted to share a disclaimer. I was assigned to go do the review of this building in Senegal, and Senegal is the home country of my mother. She was born and raised there, but I just happened to have never visited her country because she moved to Morocco when she was 18. And so I would like to thank Farouk to have sent me there, and since I've discovered part of my own personal background. So before I set up on my journey, I actually did an analysis of the plan that I'm going to share with you, where I saw that it was a very long and narrow building that mainly had on the ground floor, had one story, an auditorium, classrooms, labs, and a very large rainwater and treated water filtration basin. And on the top floor had also some offices for faculty. And finally, all of these different blocks were intercepted by circulation cores, as well as a ramp that connected the building to the main campus. And before I went on my trip, I had certain key aspects that I wanted to investigate. One of them was the very innovative use of the perforated cinder block module. And also I wanted to visit another building done at the same time by the same architect, and they were funded by the same client, but that happened, as I've read, was not as successful. So I think by looking at like an existing building that was done by the same architect using the same material that did not succeed would help me understand the larger picture of the success of this building, or not a success. One last aspect that was important for me was that the architect was a foreign firm, and I really wanted to investigate how well the foreign firm understood the local context and the needs of the users. So I've set up on my journey where I landed in Dakar, and I traveled to Bombay, which is 100 kilometers east of Dakar, but it took me 4 hours to get there, where I visited the project. And then I head to Saint Louis, my mother's hometown, where I met the local architect so that I can talk to him about the relationship with the foreign architect Idom and his input in the project, the contractor. And I looked also at the lecture building of the University of Saint Louis, where I've discovered that a very contentious relationship with the contractor was actually the cause for the low level of quality, of architectural quality of the project. And finally, I visited a couple of cinder block production units, since it is, a locally produced building material, so that I can better grasp the innovation of the architects. And finally, I went back to the project one more time to meet students since they were on holidays, and I returned to Dakar to meet the client, engineers, local consultant, etc. So very quickly about the context of Bombay, what makes actually this project very special is that it is a university building that's set in a rural university that's part of a program of the Ministry of Education of Senegal to delocalize higher education, to be able to not only retain youth, but also to propose educational programs that are well suited to a rural environment. And the University of Bombay is one of these universities that are part of this program. It's located 5 kilometers, from the center of a small town of 20,000 inhabitants. One of the things that I shared with the jury members is images of my journey, arriving in Bombay. The overall context that was extremely arid. The temperatures can reach 40 to 45 degrees Celsius. In Bombay, the traditional architecture in hay was almost all abandoned, and the majority of the construction was using cinder blocks and also metallic roofing, and there was not at all. Oh, I'm sorry. And there was not at all climate friendly. And finally, the university itself that was composed of this ad hoc buildings, that were added over time. So the lecture hall was in a way quite important to the future of this program and to the university that had to admit 1,500 students more, and it had 2,000 students. And as you can see, the decision of the architect was to actually place all of the program in one large building for a reason that I understood very quickly when I arrived there. There was no, I would say, identity that Bombay had, since it was like a recent new town. And the decision to place all of the program in this very iconic one-story building helped immensely bring a sense of pride and a sense of identity for the local youth that actually had already started to decide to stay in their hometown rather than going to Dakar for their studies. So very quickly, something interesting also about the genesis of the project, and was also a source of its success, is that it was able to happen, a building of this quality, thanks to a loan from the World Bank, but also thanks of a new branch of the Ministry of Education in Senegal called the Agency for the Construction of Public Buildings that technically oversaw all of the public buildings in Senegal. And I also understood how relevant the concept of the project was, and how the architect looked at the local culture and understood it and translated it into built form. Because in Bombay, but also in Senegal, the space under trees where there are shadows is actually a very active social space. And one other inspiration for the architect was within the campus, a 1950s building that had a courtyard that was shaded, and that had a temperature that was much lower than the temperature outside. So the architect also did an analysis of the temperatures on campus to see that it can actually vary greatly depending on the type of soil cover and also shade. And shared with me this little diagram that encapsulate the, his design was, and it was very simple. I mean, the simplicity was actually quite striking. Is on the south facade to create a double facade with a screen made out of the cinder blocks, and to create a two roof system to be able to allow for a passive ventilation and to limit solar gains. So I just wanted to end by sharing with you what were the technical and design innovations that I uncovered when I was there. The first one was this double roof system, and that was associated with a double southern facade that created a very cool microclimate inside the classrooms, but also under the shaded spaces. And this is facing the north facade. These spaces, even when students were not in class, were very popular, and students loved to hang out in them. And this is a view of the massive and very beautiful southern facade that's composed of these cinder blocks, triangulated cinder blocks. And this is the space in between the buildings and the southern facade. Another thing that element that I found was very smart and very efficient was the way that the architect organized his entire design based on a modular system that was very simple to achieve, was very repetitive, so that the training of the local contractor and workers could happen on one module and with a very close follow-up. And then that system was then very easily reproduced along a 3.5 meter grid. The windows and the structure and the railing also follow a similar repeated nature. And finally, the cinder block also was a very interesting innovation, because it took a locally produced material that can be quite banal and turned it into this fascinating large facade. So the architect and contractor built 4 molds and for 4 modules. The cinder block units were made on site and then were used, to create this large facade that in a way, depending on the time of day, creates a different experience. And this is a detail of the connection that was quite delicate to stabilize the wall. It's actually 500 meters long, and this is just a constructive detail of it that uses local materials. And finally, the last innovation that I want to share with you is this very large filtration basin that was also used as a pilot project because locals didn't believe in it. And actually, when I was there, they didn't want to make it run. And I, in a way, told them that I cannot review it if it's not tested. And so I forced them to flush the toilets, which they had never used before. And I can share with you, here is it with the water running. And I tasted it on site that it was actually working. And what was also very nice about this filtration basin is that they used volcanic stones that were local for its lining. And I was sent these photos on the wet season, and you can see how when there is a lot of rain in Senegal, because it's close to the equator, the whole filtration basin transformed in a drastic manner. And finally, I just want to end with just a quick note on the locals' opinions that actually pointed to me at certain aspects regarding the bathrooms that were the last to be completed, so didn't have a great finish. The meeting rooms that didn't fit the furniture that was sent to them at the Ministry of Education. But what was extremely successful and that they testified about was that the building was performing very well on a thermal comfort point of view. The ventilators that you can see at the fans were not even used that often. And finally, really what was very unique about this project was the sense of pride that it provided to the local youth and then to the local population. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Aziza. And so now we'll move on to Nandita.
Okay. Hi, and many thanks, Bridget, for organizing this panel discussion, and to the University of Toronto for hosting the symposium and the online exhibition. It's really wonderful to be here to discuss and celebrate this exceptional award. I'm going to talk today about why I think the Aga Khan Award for Architecture is so distinctive and relevant in our times. As part of the master jury, you realize that there are 4 salient features of the award, 4 mechanisms, which will always keep this award unique, I think. First, it's the presence of the steering committee and giving oversight to the award and discussing in very broad brushstrokes the kind of issues that could be pertinent to every 3-year cycle. Secondly, the on-site reviewers who come back, as you saw from Aziza's presentation, from these projects, having been the eyes and ears of the jury, their reports and presentations, the films that have been commissioned, the photographs and documentations collected, the questions that they have asked, help the jury make in-depth and informed decisions. And this thoroughness of the process is exceptional to this architectural prize, I think. The third, is the award recognizes patronage. The winning projects have been ones that have benefited from a rich building process. The patron, the builders, the architect, each play an important role. And in many ways, these projects, the patron is a community-based organization seeking a space that embodies the community's needs and values. The builders bring their skills and resourcefulness and are often members of the community as well, directly voicing their neighborhood's needs. So I think that's a really important aspect. And finally, since this award is given to a cluster of projects selected in each cycle, collectively the projects send out a message. So as a jury, we looked at the projects we'd selected and tried to understand what the message was that we were sending out, what the 20 shortlisted projects personified, and why we selected the final 6 that won. What is it that we as a jury try to highlight in this cycle? For us in the 2019 master jury, we felt that the underlying issue, what was crucial to our built environment, was the right to live in dignity. The contemporary conditions include, and here I quote from our jury statement, that the violence that results from climate change, rising economic and digital inequalities, epidemics, greater restrictions on liberties, growing polarization, raging wars, large waves of population displacement. And amidst all of those was the daunting task of living in dignity. And the projects that we had selected were able to, apart from being exemplary buildings, they rose above these hindrances and provided for people to live in dignity. And this is the agency of architecture. And what is remarkable is that this award recognizes this. So to me, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture really highlights the values of society and identifies and awards those buildings, those projects that are able to commemorate this. The values of our society are revealed in the buildings that we choose to build. They reflect the way we live and project what is important to us. So we see this more easily in older buildings, reading them as palimpsests, understanding layers of historical context, and attempting to glean from them an understanding of the people who built them and the events that surrounded their production. Most importantly, I think we see the culture that architects and their patrons embodied, as well as the context in which they existed. But now in the contemporary, what are our collective values? What does our architecture reveal of our values? We must ask that of ourselves. If we held precious social equity, for example, our buildings would reflect this inherently in the building program, how areas were allotted and ease of access to the commons. A building that strives for equity would give the poor or less privileged a substantial spatial share. Our response to climate too should be a societal attitude, which is manifested in the amount of energy the building consumes, the choice of materials, the ecological footprint it occupies in construction. But not always does society have a clear, positive, or unified attitude. Architects must take a moral position and embed in our buildings the values we think our society needs to aspire to. We must help construct the values of society as we construct the built environment, not just acting as autonomous agents, but we must be committed to understanding the context in which we work. As architects, our mandate is to create something that reflects the principles we want in our society, and most importantly, the values our society needs in order for equity, justice, and sustainability to be realized. This is precisely what the Aga Khan Award for Architecture recognizes: projects that are not only beautiful, but demonstrate the agency of architecture by reflecting and promoting societal values. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nandita. That was wonderful. Can we move on to Farouk? I think you're on mute, Farouk.
First of all, I wanted to talk about what Bridget is hiding from us. Bridget has been a member of a steering committee for a number of years. And before being a member of the steering committee, first she joined the award as a jury member. And she got involved in the whole dialogue and the discourse. And then she came back the next cycle asking me, Farrell, can I go and see some of the projects? Because she understood the importance of the field review, how important it is for a professor of a university, for a practicing architect, to go and look into a project as a process from a totally different point of view. Analyzing projects and understanding makes you learn. And that's what's the most important thing. And then she's been on our steering committee and trying to help us with the system, which Nandita very nicely explained how the process works. The Aga Khan Award for Architecture is about a process. It is a series of activities which all goes one hand in hand, and it's based on people. The award was created by His Highness the Aga Khan in 1977. And the reason was that he was so concerned about why our built environment is getting worse and worse by time. And that was especially in the moments which were the big changes were happening in the world. It was just after the World War II, there was, with the introduction of new technologies, which was coming, building not knowing what the context is. And so there were a lot of mistakes we've done. And those mistakes were just keeping was at the price of losing the identity of our cities, the identity of the people. And that's where he came about this whole thing that maybe through an award, we can make people aware of what they have to be, how people can ask for a better environment. And that is important, because if you have a better environment, you will become a better person. That was the way he was looking at it, because he was not looking at only as the award for architecture, but as a whole, how he can have an impact on the quality of life of the people around the world. One of the most important things is sharing experiences. Through the award process, architects and clients and users, they can share the experiences of how they've been able to achieve the problem, how to make something which makes sense. Because one of the biggest problems we have, we all think that we are the only people in that part of the world we've got a problem. And that problem is you can't come over. But when you learn that someone else, somewhere else in the world has had the same problem, but they came with another intelligent way of dealing with it. So because what's very important is how we deal with problems. And the architect's role, I mean, especially if a lot of our people now listen to us, our architecture students, you're not there just to design a building. You're there to bring a solution to a problem. And in order to do that, the first important thing is how to understand the context. One of the most important things is that you live in a city, you go maybe to another city as university. The whole thing is that what's the most important thing is how you can understand the context, even of a place that you have not been there, to be able to design for that place. And that understanding, it comes with the dialogue. That was what this word dialogue, which this cycle came about as a main theme, has been there forever. a good architecture is only a process. It's a dialogue between those people who have got a vision, which are the clients, they've got the money, who want to build something, and those people who are implementing it. And if dialogue is not there, one person can ask for something good, but because he was not able to explain to the doer how to have a good project, will have a very bad result. It is not because the person who's doing it was not, he meant not very well, but because he didn't know. And this whole thing is this, how we can use these knowledge of the others as a matter of principle. The other thing is, in the past 40 years, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture has indicated and found projects, each of the juries, which were relevant to their time, because we are judging project which has been already complete. So the ideas are not new ideas. The ideas have been there for some years before it's been tested, implemented, and tested. But what is important, the issues are not changing. The issues are there. The whole thing that how we can bring and look at something which is, as some time has passed, and try to bring those lessons out of them for us to learn. What is very important is that the steering committee, the very first steering committee of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, they set up a system. And the system is that, first of all, depends on a number of volunteers around the world who are nominators. They are the ones who are going and looking and finding projects which are exceptional. Then they're presenting to the award office, and then the dialogue starts. The dialogue with the architects, how to best present their projects, because the architects they're usually know how to make projects, present projects, but this is a different award because they have to make sure that they're presenting the projects and assuring the jury that this project works. And it has got problems, the problems are there, but has to be solved. So this is the first part of it. Then the jury members, they go through hundreds of projects. This cycle, they went through 370 projects. It was a very difficult task. It took them some days to do that, but they had to choose 20 projects. The 20 projects are what we call the shortlist. These 20 projects, all of them have got a merit. All of them are very important. And it's not a matter of which one is a winner or is not. They're all very good projects because each of them are dealing with something. They are presenting an issue, a project. And that's how the reviewers go. They come back and they explain what they have seen. What Aziza was explaining, which actually Nandita has also done this in one of the cycles, going and looking at project, is that first-hand experience of the project. And if the first-hand experience is as the jury members were there, and they can actually cross-examine the person who's gone there. Because sometimes you go to a project, you see a project, you become so excited about the project that you do not see and you do not report all the shortcomings. But when you are confronted to the jury and you're asked a question, then you have the reality, the truth will come out. And that is one of the very unique features of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, which makes it different to all other awards in the world. So, but the other thing is that once the winners are chosen by the jury, the winners are, first of all, I use the word winners. There's never a winner. No project is done by one person. The project is done by the architect, the client, the craftsman, the people who have been working, and the users. The role of the users are very important. So the other thing is that we have to celebrate these people, because we're not celebrating only the people, we're celebrating a cause. That's why that every cycle, every 3-year cycle, we have an award ceremony, which at the highest level in the country, which it becomes a national event, and we bring and celebrate all the architects. But besides that, we go back to the places. I was with Noura some months ago before the lockdown in Bahrain, because we were celebrating the whole team. There were so many number of people who were involved in the project. And once these people, during that ceremony with the Deputy Prime Minister's presence, each of them were handed a letter of thank you that you have been doing some well. Each of them will go back to their families proudly, and other people will learn from them. It means that if you do your job well, someone else will come and recognize it, and this will be a kind of encouragement of doing better projects. I'm not going to go too much into the details of the project, but what is important is that we are looking for projects. So if any of you have got any project to present, please do so. Send them to us, and then we will go and scrutinize them. And I think that, Bridget, we can now go to the questions and answers. I think that is the most important thing.
I think we're going to go to Andreas next, who will talk about Architecture in Dialogue, the book, before we open up to our panel discussion. Thank you, Farouk.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you and about the book that was the result of a process that was now described in detail by Farouk and by the other persons in the room here. It was a great honor for me to do this, and I think the book represents, in a way, the result of a very long process that you've heard. So from the nominations, from the sorry, let me just open the presentation the full way. So from the nominations, the juries and steering committees meetings, as you see the image here, the reviewer statements, and many of the arguments that around the related discussions, all this finds expression in the book. But it is neither a word-for-word documentation of the decision process, nor is it an extensive report on each of the nominated projects. The publication uses the essence of the discussions and transforms it into an autonomous concept. In this case, the idea was to pick up some of the core topics from the jury's discussions, like the cultural identity, an ongoing word that came up in the meetings, the ethical interventions, or the dignity word that Nandita also was talking about before, to engage the members of the jury and to steering committee around these arguments in another dialogue in the book. So when the discussions were finished, it was kind of out of the room, but we tried together with the jury and the steering committee to recreate some parts of the dialogue for the book. First and foremost, I want to express my deepest gratitude to being invited to be the editor of the book. This invitation offered the opportunity for me to get a personal insight into the exemplary decision process for the award that I had followed for quite some time before. Let me explain why I personally feel so strongly connected to the award program. I had been following the achievements of the Aga Khan Award since 2008, when I started the curatorial research for the exhibition Small Scale, Big Change, the Architectures of Social Engagement, that was opened exactly 10 years ago at the Museum of Modern Art. In my preceding research on built examples for the social engagement on contemporary architects, I found out that this award had been given to some of the groups and architects that I had researched. And the early award books that I found were an important source that helped me to understand the value and the impact of this unique program, as well as its role as a trailblazer for public appreciation of social values in architecture on a global scale. Accepting the responsibility as an editor for the book also came with some challenges. Not least was the tight time frame that was given, as the jury meetings for the 2019 cycle were held in the first week of June 2019, and the award ceremony was already programmed for September 13. That makes it just a little more than 2 months. The time to realize this book was very short. To be open with you, I was really scared about how could we make this happen in such a short time. But fortunately, I'm married to the publisher, Christina Steingraber, who published the book, and I knew she would help us also to know how to manage such a complex process in the text production, editing, graphic design, printing, and delivering in the given time. Like in many of the buildings in this award, the result comes from a participatory process And I can't claim this book and the result of this book for myself, but only to the whole process that it was a part of. It was an exciting experience to work with the jury members and the steering committee to create the additional dialogue of texts for the book. And it was also highly rewarding to collect all the information from the reviewers into this book. And it was a pleasure to work with Farouk, whose longtime experience in leading this award made it all possible to get necessary information together and reconnect all the loose ends after the jury had dissolved. The publication project gave me the opportunity to really stay with the whole production of this book from the beginning to the end, something I had not done for a long time. Given the tight time frame of it, it was necessary to ensure that the final result would match also in its technical execution to the high standards that they were given from the beginning. And I was happy we had also on the technical side of the production people who were excited about the book, about its content, and to help us to achieve the quality we were looking for. To sum it up, I think the publication succeeds in an independent medium, not only to document the results of the cycle, but also to transmit and to transfer this spirit of the cycle to an audience to understand the core dynamics and from a different perspective. The book takes full advantage of the transparency of the whole process and in all its phases, and it presents the core interest of sharing the insight and collective knowledge that was produced by all the participants. As Farouk said, no project was done by one person alone. He was talking about the architecture projects. This book as well was a result from a participatory process. Like the nominated and the shortlisted architecture projects, I think everybody was contributing to this in a major sense. So looking back to the long and overwhelming history of the 14 cycles of the Aga Khan Award of Architecture and its related publications, I hope this book will be helpful to add another publication to the general spirit of the award itself and to capture the specific atmosphere of this year's cycle. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Andreas, and thank you to all of our excellent speakers. I wanted to begin the panel discussion and maybe start with a kind of open question. In North America, architects have a very specific and prescribed role in realizing buildings. But what I learned from Noura's presentation is that architects wear many hats. You're an architect, but also a client, a curator, you're commissioning work by other architects, and you're really telling a much bigger cultural story through built form. And I just think that that is something that is a really important dimension, not only in your project, but if we look at the other projects in this cycle, you call yourself an architect, but really you have so many different hats that you have to wear at the same time. So maybe Noura, you could begin by just giving me a sort of some commentary on that.
Yeah, definitely, Bridget. It's, I think in the end, you can have different hats, different roles, but the focus is always on the outcome, on the project itself. What makes the most sense to do in this situation? Who's the best architect, that you could have in mind? What's the best process? Is it a commission? Is it a... And I think it's really important to always have the outcome and have the end result as really the focus, you know what I mean? And not to be so concerned about roles, I think, and I think this is one of the really the strengths and the benefits of education in architecture, I think, is that it really gives you this transdisciplinary vision. I mean, even when you're building, you're communicating with so many different parties, the client, the contractors, the craftsmen, and so on. And this applies to many different roles you can have as an architect. It's true that I've done many different things, but I have to also admit that I always do them from the viewpoint of an has these abilities, you know, through the education to do them. And it's been, I think I have a lot of chance to be able to hold these different hats. But I think that it's also really important to have this view. I think, you know, one of the reasons why we're able to sometimes build these projects or commission these projects is because I'm also an architect commissioning them, no? And I really understand what it takes to make a building happen, you know, and why risks are important sometimes, and why, you know, some things need to happen. And I think that it's important for architects to start thinking about their role also in this broader sense, you know, in government, in making policies, in commissioning architecture. Because, you know, unfortunately, we're letting go of a lot of these parts to other disciplines that maybe look at things in a different way, and we're losing ground over there.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, I think that I would say North American architecture students are always looking for alternate models of practice. And I think that in a way, there's a kind of richness, not only in this cycle of these 6 projects, but in the larger body of work where architects do many things. And I think that we need to expand our definition of what architecture is and how we can contribute as architects. Maybe Farouk, I had a question, because in this cycle, there were several, someone brought up the word patrons, and there were actually several projects in this cycle where there were actually female patrons who ran a kind of either a nonprofit or a kind of a key organization that actually drove the realization of these projects, which I think is really interesting for me to see, because without great clients, you don't get great buildings. And budget is irrelevant, put that totally to the side, but the vision of kind of what does a community really need, and how can built form actually make a difference? And maybe you could maybe speak to 1 or 2 of this cycle's projects and the role of these kind of patrons or visionaries in really helping to deliver great spaces for community.
That's a very important point, the patrons. And I'm going to compare 2 projects, which, just to come back, scale is not important, what you said. The budget is not important. Within this exhibition, you will see there's a project which is in Bangladesh. It's a floating school, and it's got a story of a patron. One Bangladeshi lady, that she was a teacher herself in the UK for many years. When she went back to Bangladesh, she took all the money that she had as her pension, and she wanted to make a school. So that is someone with a vision. She goes back to her own country. She buys a land which happens to be flooded all the time, that she didn't know, and then she hires an architect that she knew very well, and asked that architect, who's a seasoned architect, to build something on that land which floods a few months a year. So she had this vision, and she wanted, because when the architect said, listen, it's dangerous, we cannot build here, it's not the right site, she said, that's all I have, but I believe in it. So she made it possible, and by this insisting and working together with the architect, the school is there. And not only that, she's running the school and she's looking after all those people. So this is a whole thing, that how she had this vision and she made this happen. At a totally different scale, Sheikha Mai Al Khalifa, she was the Minister of Culture of Bahrain, and she's created this wonderful NGO in the name of her grandfather. For the past 20 years, she always had one thing in mind. She understood what is lacking, her culture is in danger, and she wanted to protect it with all the means that she had. Being herself as a person who she is in Muharraq, she was living, her grandparents' house was there, and she liked the place, but also as someone in the government. And she, not only that, she started new ways to do it. She, as a patron, she came back with new ideas because she herself was in the government and could see sometimes that the government, because of the different laws or because of budget, etc., was not capable of doing certain things. So she started working something new in that region, going and finding people who would, banks, etc., to come and invest in her project. But she had this. What was very important in the project was that she has got the convincing the people to do the right thing. And she does not come in the middle and say, do this or do that herself. I mean, I know that Noura will say yes to whatever I say, but still, I really believe in that. And that is very important because when you see someone with that force, you work much better. And these are the two ladies who have been the patrons of these two important projects.
Great. I'm very mindful of our time, and I want to make sure that we really have some questions from our global audience. So I'd really like to ask my colleague Mason White to kind of read out any questions he thinks would be great for this amazing panel to be able to answer and respond to.
Thank you, Bridget. There's some really great questions in the Q&A, so keep them coming. It looks like there's a lot of interest to hear more about modes of gathering information. For example, there's a question to both Aziza and Noura about being an on-site reviewer and how information is gathered. Maybe I'll ask one. For example, question for Noura, wondering how she approached or learned about context or process for understanding the culture of Muharraq specifically. And for the Pearling Heritage interviews, etc. Thank you, this is an awesome event. And there's one for Aziza, as an on-site reviewer, how much time did you invest in this endeavor, particularly because you're investigating the impact of the project far beyond the direct user? Is language an issue, and how does this research impact your own work? So maybe field reviewers can talk about that experience to start.
Yeah, sure. I mean, how long it took me? I was there for 6 days, but I would say that it took me a month before to read through the documents, to make contact. I spoke to people on the phone ahead of time. Farouk also gave me a recommendation on who to meet and who to talk to, local architects, for example. So it took, I would say, a month to prepare, 6 months on the ground. And then after that, the writing of the report was also quite long. Then how did it affect, how did it affect me? The next question, this actually is a byproduct of being a field reviewer, is not only do you get immersed in projects and understand new modes of construction, new approaches to design, new strategies that work to impact local communities, but you also create, like a network among all of the other reviewers, and I would say the Aga Khan family. And just for the little anecdote, on my way to the airport, when I was leaving Dakar, I actually saw the International Fair of Dakar, and I asked to stop, and I was about to miss my plane. I visited it, fell in love. My grandfather and mother had told me about it. And then through people that I had met there, a young Senegalese architect, we applied for the Getty grant to restore the Dakar International Fair. And we won the grant, and actually took Daniel's student for a 1-week intensive workshop back to Senegal. So I think that the impact actually of being a field reviewer went way beyond what I had imagined. So thank you again.
Great. Any other questions, Mason, you want to throw out?
Yes, there are some. There's a really great question. I guess this is broadly to jury members and steering members, that is asking, how do you imagine or wish architects in North America might change their approach to design and building based upon insights from the Aga Khan Awards?
Maybe Nandita, what do you think about that?
I mean, that's a good question. I think, I think that there are attitudes in place of working with communities and understanding perhaps what is sort of the larger sort of group of people involved in a building, where I think when you see it either through like a large, community and how things would improve for the people and how instrumental the building, or not just the building, I would say the whole project is. I think that's what works really. So, from an ecological point of view, or from social infrastructure, all that helps, bring about change. And that's where I think these projects become these kind of agents of change, and that's what's so important. And that's what, at least, and I think for many of the juries, that has been important in selecting the project. So I think that can happen quite easily. It's not impossible. It's just, it's just looking at it in a slightly different approach. Perhaps it's not even waiting for a commission to come to you. I think in part of what many of these projects that are successful in this way is because the architect is much more involved. So is the client. So is, as we're saying, like it's many different people sort of really being involved. And then also, I think this award, as I was saying earlier, does recognize that. And that is what is important. And that's how it could repeat. It's because that recognition is there. And so I think it can happen, and perhaps it will. I mean, there have been projects in Europe that have won. I don't think there have been any in North America. Farouk could know better. No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Nandita. Maybe, Mason, we could have one last question from our chat, and then we'll wrap up.
Absolutely. There's two questions that I think you could tell our audience is really listening and engaged in the conversation. There's a lot of interest in the understanding of the project before it is constructed and the understanding of the project after it is constructed. For example, there's a question from an anonymous attendee that says, does the pre-development process factor into the project analysis the same way that, say, something like local materials are? There's also a really great question about, I think, picking up on Nora's presentation about the notion of maintenance and how it addresses the sort of lifetime of the building beyond it. So I don't know if this is something for Farouk, but maybe to speak about this rather unique way of assessing projects. I also myself noticed how little the word sustainability was used, and I really enjoyed the fact that it was implied without ever being heavy-handedly stated, that it's just a sort of way in which the jury seems to understand work. So that was something I took from it. I don't know if there's a way to understand the sort of deep time of a project, or from conception in paper and in words, back to the concept of dialogue, down to conception of the project as lived. I think this seems to be of great interest to the audience today.
Maybe Farouk, you want to handle that last one and do our last response to our questions?
You're talking about maintenance and the word sustainability. I'm so happy that nobody used that word, because for a number of years, this was becoming like this magic word that's everything should be sustainable, and every student, every architect they were trying to do something which is sustainable. Sustainability is something which is, it is a part of a project, which if a project works, it's sustainable, it's there, and it is working. And it has been all throughout histories. Once I was saying that, when talk about sustainability, anything has been built before 1950s, 1940s were all sustainable, because whatever you use as the words that, all the notions are there. But what is important is that, coming back, Noura can tell us more about that. What is important is the responsibility of afterwards. The team in Bahrain, they're not only building because these architects, these famous architects come from all over the world. They do build and they go, but they know that's why it's very important, that dialogue. that Noura and her team they've got with the architects is that because they know that when these architects leave, they have to live with that for a long time, and it becomes something which becomes a part of that of the way that the design process. So from the very beginning, once what I say is enlightened client and project manager is involved in a process, can help the architect to better understand as well and come up with better solutions, because solutions cannot come after the project is done. You cannot come and repair something. You cannot redo it again. And that is very important. And that's why the word dialogue becomes more and more important.
Great. Thank you so much, Farouk. Let's go to our last slide. For me, this event is really a collaboration. It is really with the Aga Khan Award for Architecture Secretariat in Geneva. And we wanted to thank very deeply Farouk Darakhshani, Nadia Simeon, and Celine Martineau for all of their help in cooperation. I also wanted to thank deeply each of our symposium participants, Noura, Aziza, Nandita, Farouk, Andreas, for your contribution, both your presentations and this great discussion. At the Daniels faculty, I wanted to thank our interim dean, Robert Wright, for his unwavering support of this initiative, along with my Daniels colleagues, Maurizio Quiros, as well as Mason White, who both lead events and exhibitions. I also wanted to thank Jeannie Lim, who's a Daniels graduate, who actually designed the physical exhibition that did not actually get materialized, as well as a special thanks to Andrew Bacco, assisted by Nico McLaughlin, who realized the website, which is a huge resource that everyone can go back to. I think the website was located, the link to the website was shown in the chat, and I hope that you'll visit it and really enjoy the work that is there. This event also will become part of that website afterwards, so people can actually view it later on. I would also like to thank our external relations team at Daniels, which includes Nini Broad, Aidan Cowling, and also our IT staff, Melissa Montgomery, who's here in this room with me. And then finally, thanks go out to all of you in the audience for joining us. We hope that you'll visit our website. We hope that you'll learn more about the 14th cycle of the Aga Khan Architecture Award. We hope you will visit the Aga Khan website, which is extensive and vast. And we really just appreciate this conversation, which really is looking at this current cycle, but maybe what the lessons are for the future of architecture. And I think that embedded in these projects are so many things that we can learn from. And we really appreciate you coming together to this Daniels event, and to thank everyone for joining us. Great, thanks so much.